everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, Tori,
LaTara,
and Klara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
Lovecraft Country is a show nearly premiered on HBO, which follows a group of Black characters from the South Side of Chicago who are traveling through, quote-unquote, Lovecraft Country to Massachusetts. On the way, they are waylaid by monsters of both the human and supernatural sort, including racist white people who terrorize our protagonists on their journey, and horrific creatures straight from Lovecraft's own tales.
So we just kind of wanted to start out by talking about this amazing concept for this show and just how subversive it is to have a horror series with a bunch of Black characters in it. Just for context, we are all students at the University of Michigan, and I, Tori, study horror literature, actually. One of the first things I ever read about monster literature talked a lot about how monsters tend to be representations of things that people are already frightened of, and especially people who are already in positions of marginality, people who get pushed to the side, like people of color or disabled people or queer people. So it's just so interesting to see this show written from the perspective of marginalized people. It's just so outside of what horror normally looks like and outside of normal horror tropes.
And specifically for Lovecraft too, right? Like the fact that this is taking up Lovecraft's work and his legacy and talking about race and racialization is an interesting choice, right, Tori?
Yeah, it really is. Lovecraft's kind of whole concept was that humans are really small and really insignificant on the cosmic scale. But this show really refuses to let people, even people who are normally pushed to the margins, look insignificant. It's so interesting. I really think that Lovecraft, which, to acknowledge the elephant in the room, was a really racist man. Even though he was like a really racist person, I feel like his racism actually hindered him from getting to the place where he could really express this cosmic insignificance of humanity, because he was so caught up in these minute, small differences that plague humanity. So I think that this show in some ways is like doing the same thing Lovecraft did, but this time doing it intentionally, like really intentionally drawing out the individuality of these people and making us care about their insignificant lives, scare quotes. So I think this is super subversive in a really productive and amazing way. And I enjoyed this episode so much.
Yeah. It's really asking us to like consider like what constitutes or defines the horror genre. Is it the presence of monsters? Is it the psychological anxiety? All of these, different aspects manifest themselves differently in different horror movies or horror TV shows. But this one's really trying to like get us to blur the lines between psychological terror, monsters, and the terror of racism, and the quote unquote metaphorical monster of racism and white supremacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that something that the show does, which is like really interesting to talk about, I think, is in terms of its subversion. It's how it subverts horror tropes, stereotypes, sort of what we expect to see in your traditional horror narrative. And I feel like this show does some interesting things with who the characters are, their positions of power, access to information, and also how that is given to the viewer. That I really enjoyed. I'm thinking about how subversive it is.
Even the monsters themselves, which, can we talk about how terrifying those were?
Oh my God.
Guys.
It was just like, I just like character design. I just like kind of want to know what it was like for them to like do the drafting process for what's this monster called again, Tori? Is it the
Shoggoths?
Shoggoth. Like I want to know what the character design was, and just like they're so gross. They're so nasty.
So So nasty.
I firmly believe that the starting point for their design was a naked mole rat, which
yes,
repulsive.
I agree. Like naked mole rat, but like the mouth takes over the whole body and it's covered in eyes. like the eyes is what did it for me. Like so, and like when they all blinked at once, I was like, oh hell no, this is not.
Oh my god, I think I like repressed that particular detail because when you just said that, it like all like came back to you. Yeah. I was telling LaTara and Tori earlier that like this detail that stuck out to me for the monsters is that the racist white supremacist sheriff or cop, I can't remember what his exact title is, when he turned into the Shoggoth, he had his pants on still. And it's just like, just that one detail cracks me up, but also just like,
thank you for sparing us.
Man.
Yes, I actually think the choice of the Shoggoths was so fascinating because if you read the story in Lovecraft where they come from, at the Mountains of Madness, in that story, these elder beings kind of create humanity as a sort of lab accident. They're attempting to create life, and humans are like the subpar results of those experiments. But the Shoggoths are actually the slaves of these elder beings. They're the laborers. But these laborers manage to survive and like outlive the elder things and overthrow them even, which makes them a super fascinating choice for this particular series and this particular concept.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially like when you consider, like I think because like returning back to like subversion, I feel like this show complicates like assumptions or definitions of words, positions, and meanings on like multiple registers, right? So we already talked about a little bit about how it kind of complicates our conception of what is a monster. You have like the actual physical monster, and then you have humans that like do monstrous things. And then you also have like there's complication of like what horror is, right? Is it like the psychological terror of being in a chase where you can't go faster than 25 miles an hour, so we can come back to
loved that scene.
Fabulous. So like there's a lot of irony here that is included in the subversion. And one of the things like talking about like the Shoggoths, how they like in the original Lovecraft tale were slaves that like overthrew their masters, and thinking about how one of the main underlying themes I think of this show is in terms of the African American experience and like the afterlives of enslavement, right? And like how even after emancipation, like Black Americans like aren't free in a multitude of ways. And so I don't know, like to know that the Black characters are still having to deal with all of the repercussions of Jim Crow, which come along after slavery was abolished, and they are attacked by monsters who initially in the initial tale of Lovecraft were slaves and end up killing all the white men who were terrorizing these Black people. And in fact, one of them becomes one of the Shoggoths, which is crazy also. I don't know. That was a little windy. All of it to say, I feel like there's like multiple levels of irony that the show hits, and like so quickly that it takes quite a bit of time for me to sort of sort through all of it and see where it came from or what it's saying.
I think like one of the big things about the show that like stuck out to me is like how self-conscious it is, in a really not like in a negative sense of like being like self-conscious and embarrassed, but how referential it is, and how all the references to a multitude of different historical events and different images and different all different kinds of reference, different kinds of music. It's incredibly self-referential, and it's all kind of like geared to kind of tie the show together to talk about the irony of horror, to ironize the genre of horror explicitly in terms of race, and to talk about explicitly racialization as a vector of horror, or the vectors of horror that contribute to racialization, and kind of the the bidirectional or the multidirectional relationship between that. And I think like one of the standout lines to me that I like keep thinking about is the white supremacist, racist sheriff who was terrorizing our characters. And Atticus is like, they're monsters. And then he goes, monsters aren't real. And this is coming from one of the biggest monsters, one of the most like, most racist human monsters in the entire show in the very first episode.
Yep.
He's not only literally becoming a monster at the moment, but he has been a monster this entire time. He's got that thick old NAACP file.
Yeah. Yep. That was the same character.
Exactly.
Man, and just he was just so happily sadistic. Like there's something that like I think casual racism is, or sort of implicit like bias, like racism, that it's like a microaggressions is what I'm trying to say. I mean, that can be painful, but for some reason the open sadistic glee that the sheriff exhibited when he was explaining to George and Atticus and Letty, like, y'all could try to run. Sundown is in, what did he say, like 6 minutes?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. And he's like, and you this is however many, like, miles away, like, you can't make it. And he was so happy. And so, like, a human who preys on other humans for sport, for fun, is absolutely monstrous, right? And he was happy in his monstrosity, and that made my blood run cold, because it's like, how do you? It was hard for me to comprehend, like, to look at someone who is looking at you and contemplating your death at their hands, and they're so excited about it. Something about that was terrifying.
It really is, and I think that this show is so intentional about drawing parallels to our current day. You cannot forget that it's modern because you're hearing some like rap music in the background, which is absolutely not, appropriate to that time period. But you are not allowed to forget that this is an important reflection on American society today. I think like at the heart of the show, they're really critiquing like Americanness as it's been constituted, and like how Black people are able to achieve access to like the American way of life, or like the American dream.
Yeah, there's this reference in the episode that I caught, and I don't know why I have like this particular photograph in like my memory bank, but I do. There's this photo that was taken in, I think, Louisville, Kentucky, during the Great Depression after a particularly disastrous flood. And I think it's interesting for them to be playing with the time period of the Great Depression of the 1930s, referencing it in, or recreating it in the 1950s, Jim Crow America, and then therefore commenting, and then again commenting on our moment in the 21st century. But this photo is taken of a line of Black people standing in front of this ad that depicts a quote unquote like iconographic moment of the American dream. And it has the world's highest standard of living, a white family in a car, and then another line of text that says, there's no way like the American way. And so there's this juxtaposition between, the American dream, which is coded here and depicted here as exclusively white, and then the line of Black people below waiting for aid after this particular flood. And I think like the typical reading of this photograph is that, oh, this is a really, really ironic moment of American history, blah, 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 blah. But then LaTara had, a fuller and more robust reading to talk about how integral it is for a line of poor Black people to the construction of Americanness, or a construction of American standard of living. And so Americanness is a really vexed term, or a vexed concept in the TV show, and the show is perpetually critiquing it and very self-conscious about how it's critiquing it, and trying to understand different ways in which different racialized groups contribute to the construction of Americanness, of American ideals, and what it means to have a relationship to the quote unquote like American dream.
I think absolutely, Klara, like definitely like thank you for that, because I think that moment with the picture or like the billboard in the background and the line of Black people in front of it was so like striking to me, because it's like not it's not even just that Americanness is like constructed through the racialization of like non-white racial groups, but also that like it's constructed through the subjugation of these groups too, right? Like that in order, I think for me, this is like debatable, but the implication wasn't just like, of course, like not a surface level irony of, oh, here's like this like well-to-do white family in a car and also this line of Black people in need, but it's in order for that well-to-do white family to have that car, there must also be a line of Black people in need elsewhere in America. That is how our standard of living is created, right? By the exploitation of, as like Tori so helpfully called, marginalized groups on multiple registers. And so like definitely thinking explicitly about the African American experience and about like Blackness, and then juxtaposing that with like Americanness, right? And like the American dream. What does it mean to be an African American where I perhaps want to be able to call myself American, but in order to do so, does that mean that I have to then give permission to my own subjugation? Does that mean then that I have to buy into systems which are built upon the violence, the negation, the murder of Black people, and have been? I keep thinking about very early in the show when Atticus was on the bus. It was him and like that one older Black woman who were the only two Black passengers. But I really liked her. And as they were walking, after all the white people got on that like tractor thing to take them to the next town to catch the bus, and the two Black people had to walk, which was just beyond trifling. And so I was like, I know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, we all did.
It was still upsetting.
It still made me sick to my stomach. I'm like, you're literally gonna make these two people. Well, anyways, whatever.
And one of them's like an older woman, right?
An older woman, and she had multiple bags. I'm like,
multiple bags. Like, clearly she's going somewhere.
And so, like, well, I mean, thankfully, Atticus got some kind of sense of humanity, so he carried her bags for her. But they were like walking and talking about what it was John Carter, I think.
Yeah, the John Carter books by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yes.
Okay. This is another reference I lost.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that she explains, because I'm not familiar with John Carter, the book. I saw the movie like when Disney made that one that flopped like a decade ago or whatever.
It was like Keanu Reeves, right?
No, it was Taylor Kitsch.
I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm really never mind.
I want it to have been Keanu Reeves, though. I feel like that would have been.
I love Keanu Reeves.
Love Keanu Reeves.
I feel like he would have nailed it somehow.
Oh, he would have. He would have. No. It's like at any time you can take a break to talk about Keanu. I'm not tripping.
The action hero of all our hearts.
Yes. But yeah, so the main character in the book, the protagonist, was John Carter, who was an ex-Confederate, either soldier or officer. I can't remember which one she said. Officer?
Yeah.
And so the part that I loved, right, was she was like, because Atticus was talking about the book, and she was like, wait, ex-Confederate? And he was like, yeah. She was like, the hero in this book fought for the Confederacy? And he's like, yeah. And then he gives her this whole spiel about like, how like you have to find some sort of way to dissociate yourself from the characters. And I think it's implied like white American literature who do awful racist things, so that way you can still find the space to love that character anyway and love that book anyway and lose yourself with the narrative anyway. And her response, which I wrote down because it was just so incredible. She said, like ex-Confederate, he fought for slavery. You don't get to put an X in front of that. And I think it was so, because like going back to, I think Tori, maybe you made this point of how the show constantly wants to remind us of what's happening in the present, right? there's this impulse, I think, like in American culture, especially in regards to thinking of slavery and all those aftermaths, right? That's in the past. Like, why are we still talking about this? It's over. And it's like some things you don't get to put an X in front of, especially when they're still contributing to systems that are reproduced today. So I think this show does a lot with time and like really having us question what is past, what should be forgotten versus like what can't be forgotten versus what is ongoing. It takes place in the 50s, but references things from before that and from after that seamlessly.
And like that's Lovecraft's whole thing is like the monsters are constantly allowed to come back because people keep forgetting about it. People like intentionally develop drug habits. They like, you know, burn all the evidence. Like they intentionally repress what they've seen and what they know. And maybe if they would tell people about it, like they could do something, but they see this as like their only way to survive with their humanity intact. And I feel like that can be the response to confronting racism is just like sweep it under the rug because it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable to look at this part of our history. So we forget
and part of our present.
And it keeps happening.
And our present, yeah, absolutely. And like what you pointed out about the impulse to sweep it under the rug as a form of avoiding discomfort, I think is extremely apt in our present day and current moments.
To say the very, very least, it is apt.
Which is why this show is so great. It's not like it could not have been more timely. They definitely were preparing this before our current moment.
Historical moment.
Yes, before our current historical moment hit, but it could not be more timely.
The timeliness is distressing, though. You know, in terms
I wish it didn't have to be timely.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah,
I agree.
Another thing I wanted to add in terms of the John Carter.
That's right.
Yeah. And so the John Carter, the background of the Confederacy in terms of the John Carter novels and what it means for Atticus to enjoy the book and to enjoy their reading of it. I think it mapped on particularly well to what the show is doing with Lovecraft as well. And, you know, you can't put the X in front of Lovecraft's profound systemic racism. But maybe still is not even the right word, but somehow, however you define the relationship between repurposing the readerly practice of reading a deeply racist, problematic, troubling text and trying to do something with it differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's I think kind of like what you're picking up on is like a thought that's like occurred to me often for our listeners. So this is LaTara speaking. I'm a Black woman from the South Side of Chicago, and so a lot of times things that I reference here. And I study African American literature. So I'll probably refer to themes that I think about and have read about in my research, but also truthfully things in my lived experience. But so there are definitely moments, like particularly when Atticus was talking about reading books with white characters who do racist things. And as a Black reader, I think that question for me has been, so I don't want to generalize, but in my past and in my present, I constantly filter, right? Like I'm constantly like sort of categorizing what characters do, what writers do, and like when something profoundly racist happens, I often like feel a little bit of pain and then put it to the side. Because regardless, I still have to like know what happened in this book or understand the theory or at least like be able to write about the character competently without like having my hurt feelings like skew my reading. Or I mean, it could be like the impulse upon which I build my reading. But either way, it's a constant balance of emotional response and that push for like rational rhetoric or rhetorical analysis, which is sometimes in and of itself a violent experience, right? I'm constantly trying to like control my own human responses so I can produce this like perfectly structured piece of research. And so when Atticus was talking about, having to like read these books and like, oh, sometimes like the characters do like messed up things, but like you can still find a way to love the character. And I was just like, yeah. I felt that. I felt how hard that is and how sometimes you feel like you just don't have a choice to try to find something. You try to salvage something valuable anyway.
And that reminds me of his father too, Montrose, he forced him to memorize this poem, Lovecraft's very racist poem, whose name shall not be mentioned on this podcast. But he expected his son's reading to do social justice work. And it's exhausting that like Black people have to choose between, reading the stuff that everybody else is reading and reading the stuff that like portrays them appropriately, lovingly, responsively. Like it's really seems exhausting that all these pillars of literature cannot be looked to do such things, to treat Black people in a responsible, ethical manner.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, LaTara.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
I think like to kind of take this conversation on like canon and shift it a little bit to genre. I know we talked a little bit about like the horror genre earlier kind of, but like I like really I think because this show I think is like structured around this like questioning of like what is horror, what are monsters, like multi levels of scary and disturbing. I was wondering if we could like kind of go back a little bit to talk about like horror tropes that have seen or that we picked up in the show or that we thought the show did interesting things with.
Yes, there were so many.
I like monster movies, but I don't know a lot about horror tropes in all honesty.
Sorry, can you help us out? our horror like researcher. Specialist.
This isn't like a specifically horror trope, but I loved the chase scene out of the Sundown County because this was such an interesting take on the car chase, right? Because
it's not a high-speed car
chase. It's high speed as in you have like a short period of time to accomplish it, but you're going 25 miles an hour with this cop right behind you who is going to make sure you don't speed. Like it was somehow so high tension despite the fact that they're going 25 miles an hour. I thought it was incredible TV.
And it was like I think it's like quite superb moment of TV writing in terms of like its visuals, and you have like the flat land, so you have like a tarmac, or why am I thinking plain tarmacs? But it was visually stunning. The dialogue was very good. The camera work was profound. I think the color palette of the show in general is quite stunning and quite visually beautiful. But it's also tense.
Oof. Yeah, I think like thinking about like the car chase and like our discussion about Americanness, right? Like car culture being like, like cars were like invented here, like produced here, like, well, primarily until other countries like began to produce cars as well. But like the, like that the road trip, is like that's like an American type of, I don't know if trope is the right word, but it's an image that I think is very live in American culture, both historically and in various forms into the present. And so this, and I feel like in horror, like there are definitely like scenes where like there are car chases or hitchhiking gone wrong, or like someone like blows a tire and like everything hits the
Bates
fan.
Motel,
yeah, exactly. So there's like even like playing with that sort of like genre history of like car like road trips gone way left, like way left.
It just made you think that like the diner scene is like a typical like American like road trip scene, and I'm sure there are other examples. And I'm sorry that I'm bringing this one up, but then it made me think of the diner scene in Pulp Fiction, which is another like movie that's invested in like horror, and like playing with genre and playing with Americanness.
How did it take this like super tame scene of like going to a diner to get some lunch and make it so terrifying?
Man,
the lived reality of racism.
You're right.
I laugh because otherwise I would cry.
No, I mean that goes back to how I started it out, right? Like I talked about how horror literature looks when written from a position of marginality, and honestly it looks like reality, because you have this like daily lived horror of racism that is it's plenty, honestly. Like the monsters are, they're scary, but like for me the truly frightening parts of the show were the ones that happened in the 50s. It happened before that, happened after that, still happening in some places.
I think like going back to that moment in the diner, like both like Tori and Klara, like you guys both, sort of like brought together a couple things. So like that I had not realized before, and I just put together right now, and I'm excited. But so Tori, like you were like talking about like horror written from the position of marginality, and I'm thinking like what like it was something you said where I'm like what that looks like, and it looks like a thin veneer of like pretty shiny tile and new paint that covers up a burnt out building, right? Just like that diner. The moment he kicked that tile and you could see like the burnt floorboards underneath, it's like that's what like racism is, I think, in some ways in the present day, and that's what makes it horrific. It's like you see, like for example, we're all graduate students at like one of the top like English PhD programs in the country. You know what I'm saying?
Pat on our backs.
Pat on our backs, right? We're bomb, like great. But like any other major institution, major American institution, many of the systems, assumptions, structures within not just our university, but all American universities are built on white supremacy and racism. So if you look beyond like the pretty manicured campus lawns and like the gorgeous stone buildings, the obscene amount of like financial and technological resources, it's still kind of ugly underneath. And many people who come from those marginal communities live it and see it every day. You just got to peel back the tile. And I think that was the thing about the diner that freaked me out so bad, that they burned down this diner because they served Black people and just covered it up.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a Black-owned diner. This is a white woman who dared to serve Black people.
Yeah. And it's that to me, that was chilling. When Letty came out the back and was screaming, "We gotta go, get up!" I was like, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. This is bad."
Yes. Letty was a gem, honestly, in this entire thing.
Oh, she's so good. Jurnee Smollett, she's being fantastic. Like I think the entire cast is honestly incredible, and the writing is good, so they have a lot to work with. But I think they're all incredible. We're talking about Jurnee Smollett right now, and I think she's doing fantastic.
Yes, that scene.
Really incredible work with the character.
Yes.
That scene in the house whenever she was getting ready to run and the Shoggoths were out there, when Atticus like had her face between his hands and was like hyping her up, I guess, to run out there. That was like, it was so visceral, so like I was just speechless on the edge of my seat. Like it was amazing.
Absolutely. She was, I also loved her. I think, and I loved that, I feel like there's something that you mentioned earlier, Klara, like the characters here are rich and robust. Like, right? She's not like this like perfect, like, you know, like the horror movie, like, so the main girl in the horror movie is often like this like virginal fic, right? Like the final girl who like, you know, like has to be perfect more or less. And you know, she's not. And she tells you straight up when she first gets on stage, like, I ain't been to church in a long time.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly fine with that. And she's like gorgeous, and she talks fast, and she moves fast, and
the like glasses thing, that was the best thing I'd ever seen, when she like tips her glasses at those white lady.
And I don't know, like she was incredible and like not perfect, and somehow more incredible for not being perfect. If that makes sense. I don't know. For some reason, I really like the fact that like she's obviously gorgeous and talented, but like Loki clearly has issues because she still has to come home to like sleep on her sister's couch. Like she missed their mama's funeral, and I mean, there's like a hint of like, you know, irresponsibility about her, which is sort of combined with like the dependability of like she's the one who like got them out the car chase, like from the diner. She's the one who ran and got the car to like, you know, save them from the Shoggoths.
There's just so much community in this show. Like, it's just so beautiful to watch. Like, we've talked a bit about like that opening scene with Hippolyta and George, just how like wonderful that was to see like an older Black couple with like this beautiful, warm, like comfortable but also sexy relationship, and have so much mutual dependence between Atticus and Letty. They like can rely on each other despite being independent people. There's just, I think, so much to be applauded about the representation of family, and especially Black family, found family in this show.
The fullness of the characters is great. It's stunning and something to be celebrated. That they're like actual human beings, and they don't have to. I mean, there are heroes in terms of the narrative, but they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to bear the standard of perfection to be our heroes and heroines. And so it's this fullness of character, this fullness of characterization, between this complexities, all the good and the bad, all the sexy and all the warm, all the old and the young. I find to be just a joy to watch. And as much as I have like my like own personal trepidations about the politics of representation, I think it's like I think it's just a really joyful and wonderful and beautiful thing to watch.
I think also like going back to like how this movie plays with horror tropes. Like I don't know if like Torre, you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong. I have this perception of maybe not horror, perhaps sci-fi fantasy, as usually like there's like one like central protagonist who has to be like like better or smarter or like cooler or more clever or something.
The chosen one,
yeah, that. And Torre, your point about community, I thought was like sort of another way in which like this show kind of plays with like our assumptions of what happens in a horror narrative, because it truly is a communal effort throughout the episode to get the three of them where they have to go, right? Like even though I think Atticus was like the central, I assumed he was the central protagonist. By the end of the show, I wasn't.
You're not sure anymore.
Not sure, no. And like he didn't save the day all by himself. You know what I'm saying? Like that wasn't it at all. It genuinely took multiple of them to do so. And even thinking about Uncle George is like, you know,
I love Uncle George. I have an Uncle George. I love it.
But you know, in horror movies, like you have that one person who, like, I think of them as like the keeper of the tales,
the
like,
sage.
Yeah, the sage, the archivist,
or like the lore dude, the guy who has all the lore,
You know what I'm saying? And like, I love that, like he's that guy because he like reads horror and he like, you know, has this bookshop, but he also like has contacts who can do research, who will like pass on information to him. So even for him to serve that role, is still somewhat he relies on the labor of other people from his like community, which I thought was like incredible, and is one of the reasons I really liked him as a character.
That's so true. I I feel kind of bad that we like only highlighted Letty this episode because everybody is awesome. So I hope in future podcasts we're going to get to talk about how amazing everyone is and how much we love all of these characters. But I think that we should probably wrap it up for today because even though we've only scratched the surface, there's a lot more great content coming at us from Lovecraft Country, and we're really looking forward to episode 2 next week.
Yeah. Maybe we could touch on like a couple of the things that like maybe like we didn't get to talk about today, but might come up later in the future. Like one thing that we had like kind of talked about in like our preparations for this episode, like travel and the multivalences of what travel is, like both for Black Americans and then like more broadly. And so I think that would be a great one for us to come back to, especially when they start revealing more about, which I hope they do in the like later episodes. I assume they will when they reveal more about Atticus's experience in the Korean War.
Yeah. And going back to our conversation about Americanness and how it's constructed through different racializations and a bunch of different vectors. Another thing I'd be interested to see is if the show takes up like notions of American imperialism, American colonization in the 50s, right after we fight World War II, and how what the relationship between race and empire is.
Absolutely.
I've read the book, and actually like I don't want to like spend all of our podcast talking about the book because that's not the point. Like the book is the source material, but the show is its own thing.
They are different projects.
I'm really interested in the way that they're representing Atticus's military service because in the book it's not touched on quite so much, but we have Jamie Chung among our main cast, and we had this like little teaser on the phone, like his little phone call to a Korean person. So I'm really looking forward to see like what kind of role his military service is going to play in upcoming episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to see, given that Atticus is from the South Side of Chicago, which absolutely all day, every day. Same. Love it. So I'm interested to see what they do with like the Great Migration. Thinking about like we're talking about like travel and Black people. That's like millions of Black people who traveled over the course of decades. So I'm really interested to see.
Not for fun, but like
not even for fun, right? For survival. I don't want to get lynched, and I would like a job. Therefore, I will leave.
Yeah, so I'll go to Chicago.
Right. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing like we definitely like we'll talk a lot more about it, I'm sure, in later episodes. I'm interested to see what else the show kind of does with that same sort of theme.
Thank you
I'm
guys
excited to see more Atticus. I'm sorry, I want to put that in.
He's so fine. Like yes. I told y'all I'm gonna propose to him.
Just needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah, I was trying not to reveal like my level of thirst. So if y'all
LaTara, please do.
If y'all didn't bring it up, I wasn't going to. But this man is gorgeous. I just know he's utter perfection. Like it made me a little bit sick when he put on those glasses. I was like, this is not fair.
This show is easy on the eyes as far as cinematography, but also as far as our brilliant cast.
Man, beautiful.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us. This really supports us and is going to help us grow our community. If you want to keep on listening to us, just chat about this amazing show and all that we enjoyed, everything that, gave us nightmares. So thank you guys for tuning in today. And remember, always take a flashlight on your journey through creepy crawly Lovecraft Country.